Welcome to Towle Talks. Today we use nav meshes. Today we're going to talk about nav meshes, and they're useful in 3D path planning. In Unity, path planning is not a trivial thing. Therefore, if this solution works, I definitely recommend you use nav meshes. It's probably one of the simpler and more likely optimal solutions you can find. However, they do have a couple limitations. One, they have to use meshes, therefore, aka 3D objects. They don't use sprites, and they have to be in the XZ coordinate plane. So the two limitations. Today we're going to talk about nav meshes. So I'm going to make a new project, a new scene. For some reason this scene does not have a default light, so I'm just going to add a directional light. If you have one, that's fine. You're going to have a folder called actor. Inside that we're going to have two different scripts, and if you want you can have a folder for different scenes. Right now we're just going to talk about nav meshes in general. So I'm not going to use the webcam right now because I'm going to need all of my screen for this demo. Nav meshes themselves are one of the Unity's built-in ways to handle path finding. In fact, to my knowledge, it's the only way. It uses the mesh renderer to actually calculate whether or not something can walk in that area or not. Therefore, it does not work very well with 2D. There are ways to kind of get around this issue and put 3D objects on a 2D plane, but it does not actually work very well for 2D. So this is one method you can use for 3D navigations and for finding a path. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just look down the y-axis in a 3D realm. So I have Z and X, and I'm just going to add a couple different blocks. Again, you can make this as complex as you want, but all I'm going to do is add 3D objects, cubes, and I'm just going to I'm going to go orthogonal so I can see, I'm going to stretch out my cubes a little bit. The idea is we want to create kind of like a little snaky pathway. So we're going to do this real quickly. Again, I'm using the stretch tool to kind of zoom down too far there. Also, it is expecting to be oriented on the X and Z plane. So the other reason it doesn't work very well in 2D is that it's not using X and Y. It has to be on the X and Z plane. Here. So something like that. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create one more, an island that's floating off. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create two spheres. And they're going to be goal capital G1. I'll explain why in a moment. Goal 1. And we're going to put that goal at one end of our maze, per se. One thing I want to make sure they're all the same, which they're not, so I'll have to fix that. I want to make sure they're all the same Z. Probably would be okay with the way it is right now, but I don't want to take any chances. So what we'll do is we'll just select all of our cubes, and we'll say Y, sorry, all the same Y, so say 0. There we go. So now they're all at the same level. So I'm going to put the goal 1 over there. I'm going to create one more goal, and we're going to add it to, or one more sphere, and call it goal 2. And this is going to go on the island. And just making sure my goals are touching, but it actually doesn't have to touch on this one, but I like to make it clean. So here's my little world. The idea is I want to have something here that's just going to follow this path, which is obviously not that hard, to get to goal 1, and then I want to come back and I want to figure out if there's a way to get to goal 2. And the way we can do that is with an off link mesh, or off mesh link. This can be useful for, say you want to jump up to a certain place, like say your character can jump up on a building or up on a car, or perhaps the player just, it's like a teleport and the player can go to a new area. This is one easy method of doing it. So the first thing we have to do is we have to tell the computer that, or Unity, that these cubes we have created are actually walkable. So I have this navigation tab up here. If you don't have this, you can go to Windows and go down to navigation, that one. And you'll bring up this extra tab here by default. I'm going to select all my cubes and go to navigation and then go to object. And then I'm going to say navigation static, walkable, and then I'm going to bake it. I have to save the scene. So say scene 3. And then it'll come up with this blue outline, and this blue outline represents where your character can walk. Now maybe there's too much of a border here, and the reason there's a border is if I go to the bake options, I'll see is I'm expecting my agent's radius to be 0.5. That's fairly big, so we'll say 0.2, and then we'll bake again. Now you'll see that the threshold's much smaller. Word of warning, this is static. This cannot change during gameplay. Now you can make objects that can be obstacles, but you can't change this part in gameplay. Now here we have to have a way for this mesh link to get from here to here, and what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 more empty objects. We're going to create empty. We're going to call this one start, and we're going to create empty and call this one finish. And these 2 empty objects are basically going to be used as a point of reference for our link. So what I'll do is I'll click on start. I'll come back to what we have to do with this later. And we're going to add component, go down to navigation, and then off mesh link. Now here it's going to ask you what the starting point is and the ending point. So in this case we can say our own transform is the starting point, and then finish, we can drag the finish game object over here, and that will be the end point. Now one thing to be very, very, very careful with. Here I have to make sure, let me get out of the orthogonal here, that I put my game, if I go to navigation, now I see I have these little arrows. Notice there's a circle here. That means this arrow, this point is connected to a nav mesh. This is good. This point, there's no circle, which means the start is too far up in the air, and I have to move it down until I see the circle appear. Once I see the circle appear, then my mesh is in place. So now let's look at the code real quick, because that's pretty much all we have left to do. Our agent can now walk anywhere on this board, and they can take this teleport over this little island. So if I look at the code, this is the one I have look at me. This is no, don't do that. This is basically just to have the camera focus on the player. So void update if focus does not equal null. Focus is a public game object variable. If it does not equal null, then this dot transform dot look at, and the focus dot transform dot position. This will make the camera itself, this is going to be placed on the camera, and the focus is going to be the agent we're going to make in a moment, and the camera will now watch the agent move around the map. So this is what I'm doing with a look at me. Again, you can pause the video if you want to copy this down. This transform.lookAt is very useful. I recommend it. Now, over here we have a little bit more complicated, but not too much. One, we're going to have a nav mesh agent, and a nav mesh agent is going to be a component we're going to put on our actor. So we're going to have this element here, and we're going to have vector 3 goal 1, vector 3 goal 2, and then what we're going to say is we're going to say my nav is this game object.get component nav mesh. So again, I'm dynamically getting the nav mesh agent. Then I'm going to find game object.find goal 1 and goal 2. I don't think we've actually found any objects dynamically. So this is how you find objects. Word of warning, this method will only work if the object's active, and if there's more than one, it'll return the first instance. It'll say .transform.position, and we'll set that to goal 1. Remember, goal 1 is a vector 3. Likewise, goal 2, we set to goals 2 transform.position. So I'm only storing the vector 3s. So I'm going to say my nav, now remember this is the nav mesh agent, .destination equals to goal 1, my nav.resume. And that's all there is to it really. All I'm going to do is set the destination, for, in this case goal 1, vector 3, and say my nav.resume, and my agent will start moving toward it. Once on my update, I am going to set goal is equal to 0. This is a public int. This is just telling me where I'm at. So once goal is equal to, or once I have, then my nav.remaining distance equal to 0. I've arrived, and goal equals 1. I'm going to increase the goal, set my destination to goal 2, and do my nav.resume. Notice that because this is saying if goal equals 0, this if statement will only trigger once. Again, you can pause the video if you need to. Now, this may not make a lot of sense in a moment, but here we make our actor now. We'll go say game object, create 3D object capsule, and I don't think we actually have to put a rigid body on it, but I'll put one on it just for the heck of it. Physics, rigid body, constraints on the angle so it can't, or rotation so it can't rotate. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add navigation nav mesh agent. So here's that nav mesh agent we're going to grab. We actually don't have to worry about changing anything here, so we're just going to leave this alone. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add our actor script. Fine, I'll do it this way. Actor script, and goals will be. Oh, that's fine. That's everything. Everything should be set there because everything's dynamically found. And then on our main camera, we're going to add script look at me, and the object of our attention will be this capsule we've just created. I want to put the capsule above the walkway so it'll fall and then start moving. I also want to disable the sphere colliders on the goals because I want the capsule to be able to go into them. And I want to check out where my main camera is. Of course, it's not even looking at the object, so let's change that. We'll put it a little bit above. Let's give it, and remember the camera is going to face the capsule. So now if I run it, there's my capsule. I can shrink. Oh, I should shrink my capsule down a little bit. But you can see the capsule is following the path. It's going to goal 1. Once it reaches goal 1, it's going to now look for goal 2. So it's going to move around. And when it gets that off mesh link, it's going to jump and hit goal 2 and then be done. So those, as a very quick example of how to do nav mesh agents, you could use the same principle for making enemies track your player, because they could once in a while they could update and know your player's location, and then set a path on their nav mesh. You could also make this as enemy doing a routine, walking from 1 to 2 or 3 different goals and doing like a loop or doing a patrol. You could also set the enemy up to do that. So these are just different things you can do with the nav mesh. Again, it requires a mesh renderer, so I'd use 3D objects, and it has to be in the X and Z plane. That concludes a brief tutorial of nav meshes. I hope you found it interesting and learned something from it. Please like and subscribe. This has been Towle Talks. Until next time, cheers.